constituent service. We set up a lot of very ambitious and complicated programs under the CARES Act, the first big piece of legislation dealing with the COVID crisis that tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of my constituents have been depending on. And we use these sessions to try to make sure that people, that folks have all of their questions answered, whether they're dealing with the unemployment system, or small business owners dealing with the Small Business Administration, or today the issue at hand is housing. We committed in the CARES Act and in all the national policies that we've worked on since to try to make sure that nobody loses the basic right to a home, to having a roof over their heads because of the economic and public health crisis. And so we've had eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, and we've had dedicated assistance for renters who need it. We get, again, a lot of questions from constituents about how these programs work, questions from renters, questions from landlords as well, who we recognize are also under tremendous pressure. So I'm grateful to our four guests for being willing to spend a little bit of time with us and with you, explaining how these programs work and taking some questions. I'll be on for the first few minutes, but I'll have a full report of the whole session. We need this, I need it, because we're now, as you know, working on the next relief bill, the American Rescue Plan, which will very importantly extend many of these programs, because we feel for at least the next few months, folks are going to need more help as we hopefully complete the job of crushing this pandemic. So with that, thank you all for joining. Hope it's a useful session. I'm sure we'll all get a lot out of it. Thanks again.
Thanks, Tom. We are going to start off with Justin from the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Thanks, Nuri, and thanks to the Congressman and the team for putting on the session. It is really valuable. We need to get the word out as much as possible. So I look forward to your questions and everything else later on. Not only has the pandemic been devastating to residents of New Jersey, but the recent information I know has been overwhelming. So, you know, we're here to work with you to help you try to navigate some of these ways of assistance with housing. Is this good? So this is just a quick snapshot of some of the funding that's been sent through HUD, but please know that this is not exhaustive. A lot of the other funding is coming from other federal agencies as well to do rental assistance programs. We do have a foreclosure moratorium through the Federal Housing Administration and an eviction moratorium from the CDC and eviction from the CDC and FHA as well. That has been extended through June 30th. I know we'll get into this a little bit more, but there's also a state level restriction as well. HUD has been constantly publishing more and more coronavirus resources, whether that applies to your housing or small businesses or otherwise. So I'll make sure that this presentation is available as well after today's session. When it relates to homelessness housing, please know that if you think that you might be in danger of losing your residence, emergency housing assistance is available. Our emergency solutions grants and our continuum of care funding goes to service providers throughout the state and localities to make sure that people do not lose their homes at this time. We just re-upped our award to all the nonprofits across the state. And just at least in your area, I do want to make you aware of the continuums of care. Those are the nonprofits that provide assistance for you or for people that might be on the verge of homelessness. Each county has a designated continuum of care, and then they also have subsidiaries throughout the counties to make sure that they're helping people at the local level. So then I'm sure that some of these things are high on your list to discuss, but we deliver housing assistance for low-income, elderly, and special needs populations. The funding is provided by HUD with federal requirements and regulations, And often money is passed to states, housing authorities, counties, and municipalities. So there's a few different ways that you can obtain assistance for subsidized housing. The first one is privately owned subsidized housing. HUD helps apartment owners offer reduced rents to low-income tenants. We do have a search function on our site to help you locate those through the HUD resource locator. Public housing, there are many public housing agencies across the state. Those provide affordable apartments for low-income families, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. And to apply, you would contact a public housing agency or the State Department of Community Affairs, which also operates as a public housing agency. Then there is also the Housing Choice or Section 8 voucher program. This enables you to find your own place and use a voucher to pay for all or part of the rent. To apply, you also contact those public housing agencies, and the housing costs that are put through those essentially cover rent and utilities and should not exceed 30% of a household's income. Oftentimes there are waiting lists, but if you do contact HUD or one of the state agencies, we can help you navigate that process, as can housing counseling agencies, which I'll discuss a little bit more. For housing assistance for homeowners, the Federal Housing Administration backs many mortgages, and there, as I mentioned, is that moratorium in place. And if you are having any problems, you can contact the FHA Resource Center or contact a HUD-approved housing counseling agency in New Jersey. And then I also did want to make mention that there is a New Jersey law, but not federal law, that makes it illegal for a landlord to refuse to rent to a person who has a Section 8 voucher or another type of housing assistance. New Jersey also has an Office of Civil Rights, and their offices or colleagues at our colleagues at Legal Services can also help you. And then I also just wanted to let you know about some of your rights under the Fair Housing Act. So specific to the Fair Housing Act, you are protected from discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. And then as of this month, HUD has just extended its enforcement of the Fair Housing Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. We are also accepting any of those complaints as far back as January 20th of 2020. So if you believe that you have been discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, this is relatively new, and we are accepting cases as far back as January of last year. The last thing here I also wanted to mention is that we do have a relatively new Envision Center, which is a hub that offers residents support and resources. Yvette Day in Phillipsburg is running that center and is a really valuable local partner connecting residents with supportive services, raising some other issues that are of high priority in Phillipsburg. And then lastly, I also just wanted to let you know that if you do have questions, complaints, or would like to help navigating the agency and all of the benefits that we might offer, please contact us. I'll also put the email address in the chat, but nj_webmanager@hud.gov is going to be your main entry point, and those messages will go directly to me and my team, and we can get a support specialist involved to help you with your inquiry. With that, let me turn it back. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Justin. And I will put that email address in the chat feature in just a little bit. And this presentation and this video, the recording of this event, will be sent out to all of the participants after this meeting. So you will be receiving this information in that format as well. Just a reminder, if you have a question, please ask your question first in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. When doing so, please include the town you are from. Our next guest that we are going to have present is David Saltzman. David, you can take it away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I want to speak for myself and Mr. Harris. We both work at Legal Services of Northwest Jersey in Morristown, but our office provides legal services advice, and likely representation in Morris, Warren, Hunterdon, Somerset, and Sussex counties. I'm going to talk to you about the foreclosure implications of the COVID-19 right now from a state perspective, whereas Justin spoke about from a federal perspective. As of March 28th, 2021, the governor entered an executive order in New Jersey, and it did a couple of different things, but as part of the executive order, there were implications to foreclosure and the practice of foreclosure in the state of New Jersey, as well as landlord-tenant matters. I'm going to speak about foreclosure, and Mr. Harris and Mr. Abreu are going to speak about the landlord-tenant parts of it. What I should tell you to start off with is, before we got started, before COVID ever arrived, the time frame for a New Jersey foreclosure matter was roughly 8 to 10 months. In March 28th of 2021, per the Executive Order 106, there were a couple of really big important changes that immediately changed within the state of New Jersey. The governor managed to get several different large banks, national banks, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, US Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. And for a three-month period, he had them do several different things. One, they halted all foreclosure sheriff sales statewide, which was a really big deal. Two, halted all lockouts following the sheriff sales statewide. Further, there were a 90-day grace period for all mortgage payments within the state of New Jersey. Three, any additional related fees for people who were late on their mortgage payments, think late fees and other charges, those were waived. And that there would be no credit score changes due to the late payments due to COVID. Those initial protections only lasted for the first 90 days. However, let me just say that even with those changes that the governor gave, folks still need to pay their mortgage, right? And more importantly, you need to pay the mortgage in order to prevent foreclosures from commencing. Now, from the first 90 days of protection, they're under the Executive Order 106, there have been continuous protections that haven't gone away. Specifically, that you cannot be locked out of a house that's in foreclosure, and the sheriff sales have all ceased as it relates to the foreclosures in New Jersey. Those other protections, those other additional protections with regard to late fees and other the grace has gone away. What's important here that I want folks to know is that this doesn't prevent foreclosures from starting in New Jersey, right? Further, it also allows the litigation to move forward. The protections that are still in existence right now only protect against the end pieces, the lockout and the sheriff sale from occurring at the end. That's the protections that are still there, and importantly, that are still protecting those in New Jersey. Most importantly, the Executive Order 106, it started on March 28th, but pursuant to the governor's continuing orders, it allows for those protections to still remain in place from the end of the emergency, whenever that occurs, plus 60 days longer. And so these foreclosure protections that are in existence right now will go until, right now, as of today, they'll go till May 18th of 2021. And so those protections are going to be there and they're going to be in effect. The governor has already extended the protections that we've just discussed 10 times. And I don't know if he'll do so again, but I suspect he will. That's all the time that I have, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Harris, if I may.
Thank you, David. I am going to talk about the same executive order, really, that David did, but more in the landlord-tenant context. There is, as Justin at the outset mentioned, there is a moratorium on evictions from the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. Generally here in New Jersey, at least at Legal Services, we haven't done very much with that moratorium because the moratorium put in place by the governor when he signed Executive Order 106 really offers some more protections and So really that is the moratorium that has been applied in New Jersey as opposed to the CDC moratorium. However, if, as David described, if Governor Murphy does not renew the state of emergency, or once the state of emergency expires, if the CDC moratorium lasts for a longer period of time than the New Jersey moratorium, then certainly we would be more involved with that prevention on eviction. But in terms of Executive Order 106, as David mentioned, back in March, the governor stopped all evictions and lockouts in the state of New Jersey. There is one exception to that Jose is going to talk about in a minute. And also for tenants, the protection extends for 60 days beyond the end of the state of emergency. As he said, it's May 18th. And so this would apply to folks who are in the landlord-tenant process really at any stage. The last day that landlord-tenant court was operating fully, or at least in person, was Friday, March 13th. And so since that time, really the courts have been shut down. So any tenant who was at the end of the court process and was set to be evicted close to that time, or any cases that have been filed since then, those folks would be protected from eviction. Landlords do still have the ability to file a landlord-tenant case. In terms of the types of cases, I mean, the vast majority of landlord-tenant cases that are filed are non-payment of rent cases, and the court currently is not hearing those. There is an exception to the executive order allowing emergent landlord-tenant cases to be heard. Again, Jose is going to talk about that in a minute. And so there is a special process where if there's an emergent situation, a landlord can file a case and have their case heard if they can convince a judge that there's an emergency. But in general, for non-payment of rent, no one should be getting locked out. No tenant, that is. Now, just in the foreclosure context, this does not mean that tenants don't have to pay the rent. The rent certainly does still accumulate. It is possible now, at least, to also incur late fees, other penalties, perhaps attorney's fees if the landlord hires an attorney to file a case. And so all of these landlord-tenant cases really are just sitting there waiting to be heard, but it doesn't relieve the tenant of the burden to pay the rent. As Justin mentioned in the beginning, there are a number of rental assistance programs through the federal government and also the state and private nonprofits or charities to help tenants, and some also to help landlords in terms of rental assistance. And hopefully we'll be hearing a little bit more about those soon. A couple of things I do want to point out: the moratorium does apply to residential tenancies. And there is a bit of a gap in terms of the protection, at least for generally lower income folks who are living in a hotel or motel. We at Legal Services specifically deal with folks who are low income, and so sometimes they are not in permanent housing or have transitional housing and stay at a hotel or motel either permanently or in between other permanent residences. And so it's always a bit of a tricky legal calculation to figure out whether a person residing in a hotel or motel should be considered a tenant or whether that person should be considered a transient hotel guest. The difference being, if they're a tenant, the motel owner would have to file a landlord-tenant case to force that person to move out. Whereas if a person is a transient hotel guest, they can simply put them out or call the police and get them to leave if they're not paying the bill. in order to fill some of that gap, or at least clarify some of that sometimes legal confusion, there is an administrative order that was issued in New Jersey. It's Administrative Order 2020-9, was signed by Colonel Patrick Callahan, who is the head of the New Jersey State Police and the head of the Department of Emergency Management. Executive Order 106, signed by the governor, specifically granted Colonel Callahan the authority to make clarifications or alterations to the executive order. And so this administrative order that I just mentioned says that if there is a person who is residing in a hotel or motel on a continuous basis and has no other permanent residence to which they may safely or lawfully return, then that person is not considered a transient guest. And if they're not considered a transient guest, that means they're protected by the moratorium in Executive Order 106. So that's kind of a big mouthful, basically, to say if you have someone living in a hotel or motel that doesn't have somewhere else to go, I mean, this is not, if you're on vacation, you don't feel like paying the bill. If this is someone's home and they've been residing there continuously, then folks in that situation are similarly protected by the eviction moratorium, just like other tenants are. We've had some, legal services have had some litigation around, sort of where the line is and who gets protected and who doesn't. But in general, that's the way it goes. I think for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Jose, who's going to talk a little bit about the current status of landlord-tenant court.
Hello, I am Jose Abreu. I am an attorney with Central Jersey Legal Services. It's a legal services office just like the one Elliot and David are with, except we serve Middlesex, Mercer, and Union counties. And I am going to elaborate further about the status of the law, the status of the courts, and the status of assistance during the pandemic. As far as assistance is concerned, the one important thing to remember is that there is a statewide phone number you can call to be up to date with what assistance is available, which is 211. And you can always call that number. And the other important thing I'd like you to leave with today is that if you have any questions regarding anything, you can call one of your county or your county legal services office for legal assistance or for explanation. So those two important things, 211 and your local legal services office, are the two things to really keep in mind, because you are getting a lot of information today. And so these two will be most important, I think, because that's where you can get further help. So 211 will tell you where there is assistance available and what kind of assistance, and our legal services offices in each county can help you with legal issues or legal questions that you may have. So having said that, after March 13th, the courts stopped seeing non-payment of rent eviction cases. They can be filed. They will sit there, like Elliot mentioned before, but the court is not hearing them. They are also not entering judgment for possession or locking anyone out in those cases. So if the case was filed prior to March 13th, but there was no trial date, there hasn't been one and there won't be one yet until the courts resume hearing those cases. But that only applies to non-payment of rent cases. There is a way for a landlord to file for an eviction for cases other than non-payment if the landlord can show that it is in the interest of justice to file such a case and to have the court hear it. The court itself has issued orders with some guidelines about this, and some of the cases that the court has said will probably meet the interest of justice requirement are cases in which the tenant may be causing damages to the apartment, where there may be criminal conduct in the apartment, or certain types of breach of lease cases. whether these cases ultimately result in a judgment for possession and in an eviction will depend on the case itself. It will depend on the facts. All of the defenses available in these cases remain in effect. That has not changed. What the pandemic has done to the law is increase the protections available, not change or decrease any of them. And so in a damage case, for instance, if the court determines that it will hear the case because the tenant is causing damages and the landlord has filed an eviction action, you will, as a tenant, have the chance to defend, and the landlord still has the burden of proving that there were damages and that those damages were caused either by the gross negligence or the intention of the tenant. So the law remains in effect as far as that is concerned. The only thing that has changed is what type of cases the court will hear. And once the court has determined that it is in the interest of justice to hear the case, all notice requirements and all of those defenses that may be available remain available, and the landlord still has the same burden he or she had before to prove the case. And so you may have a case based on that. Evictions are stayed in residential cases, and so there will be no evictions now, like Elliot mentioned. And even if the case is pending, even if there was a warrant issue, but it wasn't executed, it won't be executed unless, again, the landlord can file a motion and show that it is in the interest of justice to do it. I think Elliot also mentioned that although you are not being evicted because of the moratorium, you still owe rent. Rent accrues every month and it's owed. And so it is important, if possible, to pay it, because there are two things that will happen. One, when the moratorium ends, then there will be massive evictions, and that's what we are projecting as well. And it will be then, not only will there be a lot of evictions, but it will be way more difficult to find alternate housing because everybody who's being evicted, of course, will be looking for housing at once. The other problem is that the landlord can file a separate action for money, not for possession, but for money during the pandemic, and that can be heard by the court. And if it is heard, it may result in a money judgment that the landlord can then try to collect if you as a tenant have employment. So there are good reasons to try to get assistance if you are behind on the rent, although there is a moratorium and although you cannot be evicted during these times, because it is important to make sure that when the pandemic ends, when the moratorium ends, that you don't have a massive debt to the landlord that then will only result in an eviction at that time, and the other repercussions that I just mentioned. During these times, you also have the rights that you usually have to habitable premises. And so if there is lack of heat, if there is major habitability issues, you do have the right to premises that are habitable, even though you may not be paying the rent at the time. It is just more difficult to enforce sometimes when the landlord is not receiving the rent, but you do have that right. And so you can report that to your local housing code enforcement. Withholding rent remains a remedy. And so if for whatever reason you are withholding the rent because of habitability issues, you do have the right to do that. Withholding means you have the rent, and at some point when the cases may be heard, you may have to pay it into court. At this point, the moratorium on eviction remains. The court is still not hearing cases, and when it does, then there will be an order that will say so, and during these forums, it will be publicized. You may still receive an eviction complaint for non-payment of rent. Although the court is not hearing the cases, the landlords are allowed to file them. And so they are being filed. So you may receive a complaint for eviction with an LT docket number that has the letters MID, LT. And it will not have a court date on it, but it will have a docket number. It will have all of the allegations that the landlord is making. It just won't have a court date. The other thing the court might do, if a case like this is filed for non-payment eviction, is inform you that there will be a mediation or a settlement discussion about it, because the court has a program to try to have settlement discussions between the landlord and the tenant, and those discussions happen virtually by phone or by Zoom. But the court may give you a notice either by email or regular mail where they schedule a date for you to virtually conference with the landlord. The court offers a mediator for these conferences, and the purpose of it is to try to find, if possible, a resolution. Those conferences, those mediation sessions, those settlement conferences are voluntary. You don't have to attend. And if you do attend, you don't have to settle, because you may attend and then say, well, if I'm here, certainly the court expects me to settle, because then why did I attend if I'm not going to settle? That's not the case. The court expects you to go to the conference, settlement conference, in the event that it is possible to find a resolution. If it isn't, it's not a waste of anybody's time, because you now know that there isn't. So the conference itself is not mandatory, and the settling is also not mandatory. It is a good idea, though, to attend these conferences, just because you may find some kind of solution. And it is important, as I said before, to try to resolve your non-payment issue during the pandemic, if possible, so that you're not having to look for housing when everybody else is also looking for housing. So that is all I have for today. When there is a Q&A session, then we may elaborate some more, but that is all I have.
Great, thank you, Jose, and thank you to all of our guests today. We are actually going to go straight into live questions. So just as a reminder, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to ask your question. When you do so, please include the town you are from. This will help me identify you amongst the many people we have in this meeting today. So please remember to use the chat feature rather than raising your hand. All right, we are going to start off our questioning with Diana from New Providence. Diana, can you hear us?
Yes. I have a thought that maybe I could turn my rental cottage into a low-income cottage. I've been struck with a lot of health issues and financial issues, and I'm barely getting by. And I didn't get hardly any assistance for utilities. So I just like owe $1,200 in utilities. I didn't get anything off the monthly. Is it possible, and to do it in, a fairly quick manner? My landlord is willing to turn my little rental cottage into low income, which I am currently a very low income. And how would I do that?
Diana, this is Elliot. I just have a question. So you're a tenant renting the cottage, and so you want to turn the property that you're already in into a low-income unit? That's what you're asking?
Yes, I've been here long term, but I've lost my job, I've lost my health, I've lost all my 401k, and the landlord is even amenable to that because I've been a good tenant. But I just wouldn't know how to do it, or whether it would, how long it would take. And when, in May, I'm going to be in crisis mode, worse than I already am.
Got it. Okay. So I'm not sure that it's possible to convert your property into I mean, what most folks think of as a subsidized property really is either subsidized by HUD or some other entity. There are a number of types of both federal and state subsidized properties. Many of them are either rehabilitated and get federal funds to do the rehabilitation, or they're built new. Sometimes there are properties that are subsidized through the IRS. They're called low-income housing tax credit properties. These are generally larger complexes. I'm not aware of a program that would allow an individual private landlord to convert his or her property to a subsidized property. You may be able to do that is to get a subsidy yourself. Justin mentioned the Housing Choice Voucher Program, still sometimes called Section 8, is a housing subsidy that follows a tenant around. Literally, the tenant can take a voucher from one private house to another. There are also some state subsidies that are modeled on that. There's something called the State Rental Assistance Program, or SRAP voucher. If you have particular disabilities, there are supportive housing vouchers. And so there are a number of types of subsidies, that you may apply for as an individual person, which would sort of have the same effect of making your tenancy a subsidized tenancy. So I think that's about the only way you really could do it, rather than sort of converting the building itself to a sort of quote unquote low income property.
Let me add that there is county welfare offices or boards of social services. In each county, there is one in which you may be able to apply for temporary rental assistance. So the ultimate solution, like Elliot mentioned, is a Section 8 voucher, perhaps. That may take time when you apply, but there is also temporary rental assistance through your local welfare office. And I say local, I mean county local, not city local. But that's a great source of assistance. Depending on your type of income, you may qualify for that. Once again, calling 211 is a good way to know, because you can tell them your situation and they'll direct you to the best place, which again may be temporary rental assistance.
I'm not getting directed, and thank God, or I would be out on the streets. I did get temporarily COVID rental assistance, which my landlord told me about. But once you start looking for programs or calling 211, you get all these websites. Nobody picks up the phone. And I more than qualify for utility help and was supposed to get a monthly credit. Did not get that. So my utilities will be shut off March 31st. So I'm spinning my wheels, reaching out and applying for things and calling to follow up on the utility and just getting nowhere. I just don't even know what to do anymore.
Your utilities shouldn't be shut off at this time, though.
No, but I mean, the emergency is till March 31st. And if that doesn't get extended, I mean, I owe $1,200. So even if they divide that, over 12 months and add it to the payment I can't already pay, I'm drowning. And, I've spent a long time reaching out to so many places, and now I'm just beside myself. And I have so many physical problems, but I missed the cutoff for federal disability, which would then bring all of this pretty much to my doorstep. So I don't really qualify as being federally disabled because I didn't have enough work hour credits. But I have so many health issues right now. I don't even know how I would pick up and move if I had to.
Diana, Justin Scheid from HUD here. I would just suggest that you contact the Union County Housing Authority. You're in New Providence, right?
Yeah.
And also the State Department of Community Affairs to get you on the list for a Section 8 voucher. If you'd like, email the email address that was provided in the chat, nj_webmanager@hud.gov. Don't provide do not provide personal details like a social security number or date of birth. Simply your name and place of residence and the issue that you're having. And we can at least get you in touch with some of those housing authorities to see what those options might be.
Yeah, I think that would be great because I'm not the only one, that's going through a lot right now, I realize.
Yeah, very
true. And Diana, just to chime in, I will also send you our casework link. We have caseworkers in our office who may be able to help advocate for you. So I will message you that casework link to grab your information from.
Yeah, that would be great, but I've already been to the congressman's office like 4 times. So just at this point, I'm beside myself because I keep doing all the work while I'm ill and not feeling well and can't pay most of my bills. So if you would do that, and if somebody could follow up with me, that would be great.
Yeah, I just sent you the casework link, and we will have a caseworker reach out from our office, reach out to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. All right, next up we have Nadia from Cranford. Nadia, can you hear us?
I can, yes. Thank you for taking my question. So my question is, my family, they're not a big corporation. It's just literally just mom and pop that have a couple of rental properties in Elizabeth. And there's had some tenants that haven't been paying rent whatsoever since the beginning of the pandemic. No attempt whatsoever to even communicate about paying rent. One, just up and left in the middle of the night because they obviously are accrued so much back rental and decided, let's just leave versus trying to deal with it. And others just aren't paying rent at all. Yet, the property taxes, utilities, upkeep, I keep hearing about assistance to, tenants, but what assistance is there for small landlords that their sole income is, getting rental property or rental income, and you can't file for unemployment. All the upkeep, taxes, utilities, et cetera, keep accruing. I just foresee, once the moratorium ends, all the tenants who owe, a substantial amount since the beginning of the pandemic, just up and leaving the landlords high and dry. Pretty much, I've been researching for any type of assistance for landlords, and I don't see anything. And these folks are ultimately going to lose their properties, or owe a substantial amount in back taxes from liens. Yet there's no assistance to landlords, from what I see.
Yeah, there was, I don't know that the application period is open now, but the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs had a small landlord emergency grant program called, it was SLEG. And on the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs website, they had an application. I believe the window for that is closed at the moment. Initially, the DCA got, I believe, $100 million through the CARES Act to provide rental assistance. I've heard that more money is on the way, and so they may reopen or institute another program like that for small landlords. This specifically was geared to landlords who own fewer than 10 properties, I believe. And so that may be one option if it comes open again. Certainly, if you or your family have mortgages on the property, you may qualify to either have the mortgage forbearance, to have those suspended at the moment so that you don't lose those properties. And certainly, even though it's sort of a roundabout way, if you encourage your tenants to seek rental assistance, many times the way those rental assistance programs work is that the rental assistance is paid directly to the landlord. So, it's not as if the check goes to the tenant and then they put it in their pocket and skip town. If the tenant qualifies for that rental assistance, then that money should be coming to you and your family because it's for the rent. It's not for something else.
Yeah, no, I did apply for originally when that small landlord application, never heard anything back. And from my understanding, there's none left there. No one ever contacted me. And in terms of the tenants, I do know that they are working, so they don't qualify. It's just, they just choose not to pay rent. Well, I don't know if that's the reasoning, but I don't believe that they do qualify. And yeah, haven't been receiving any rent since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's a substantial amount that's just coming out of pocket for the landlords. So.
I'm sorry, Justin, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that issue, Nadia, thank you, is high on our radar. I can't speak on behalf of the state, but that program was very much oversubscribed quickly. And I know that it's also an issue of with very small landlords in particular, for 1 to 2 units that may not have even qualified for that SLEG program that was mentioned by Elliot. So it's high on our radar. I'll try to provide more information through the Congressman's office once we hear whether or not the state is standing up more programs, but the funding is still making its way out to the states. It's not a great answer for you, but we're hopeful that we can keep working on that.
Thank you.
In the category of 2 other suggestions that I think are not terrific. One is that certainly landlords could file, as Jose had mentioned, collection actions either in the special civil part of the law division to try to collect on some of those funds. It's imperfect, and even if you obtain a judgment, you may not be able to collect on it. But it is a method to try to get some funds coming back in. And 2, you just might want to check in specifically with the mortgage lender for each and every one of the properties that you own to see if they have some sort of internal programs that might give you some relief, or at least allow you a longer time period to repay on the arrears that you currently have. Thanks.
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, everyone. Next up, we have Stephen from Clinton. Stephen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, Nuri. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. So I am a landlord, and very much like Nadia, it's interesting. We're 51 minutes into this program, and I've heard about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars going to tenants. Yet the landlords somehow are the evil ones in all of this. The SLEG program, David, you're 100% correct. But SLEG did not allow condo owners. On the 2 occasions, no condo owners could get any sort of relief. So we have a small LLC. It's the primary income for my 80-year-old parents. And we haven't had a tenant who hasn't paid since March. We've gone through the mediation route. They just ignored it. We've gone through the judgment. We're now at the judgment area. We're now going through the final things. Each time the tenant just refuses to ask. So the problem that I have is all I hear about relief for the tenants and one program, one single program where money has come to the landlords. And I think the SLEG was a fantastic concept. Money would come to the landlord to pay the rent. But on 2 cases that it came through, nothing for condo owners. So we have to pay taxes, we have to pay insurances, and we have to pay homeowners associations fees. So apart from being out of the rent, I also have to pay all the others. So I'd like to hear what you guys have on offer.
I do want to clarify that the hundreds of millions of dollars that are available for tenant assistance go to landlords, because it is for assistance for the tenant with the rent. And so that is assistance that ultimately goes to the landlord to pay the rent. So all of that assistance is for that. I think David mentioned that there is the possibility of programs for mortgage, and Elliot mentioned that as well. But I did want to clarify that point, that all that assistance for tenants is for rent. And so it goes to the landlords.
And if the tenant is not talking to you, how are you supposed to find out what they're getting?
Well, the tenant may not be applying. That's different. But I'm just clarifying your point that there is all this money available to tenants. It's not really to tenants. It actually is to landlords via tenants. Now, if they don't apply, of course, then they're not getting the assistance, and neither maybe you. But David also mentioned, and I mentioned, that you can file a civil action against the tenants to try to get a money judgment, which is not independent. It is not exclusive of the eviction action. So you could actually, when you file an eviction action, normally, normal times, that's all you would file. But you can file 2 actions at the same time, a special civil part action and a landlord tenant action at the same time, 2 different separate cases, one for eviction, for possession, and one for money. So
thank you. And I've done both of those. Like, you know, you mentioned it earlier on, you put it very nicely. When all this happens, there will be an avalanche of tenants out on the street. And I feel for you guys who are in the support of looking for housing, because there won't be any. Either the small landlords will go out of business, or sorry, Noreen, it's not me that's with the microphone. And it'll be a huge problem, but of course, it'll probably be until the end of June. So now I'll be, excuse me, 16 months without rent. So now I'm probably the better part of $20,000 in the hole. I have to pay the fine state of New Jersey taxes. I have to pay county taxes and property taxes. So net, I'm actually paying out about $12,000 and get nothing. I just don't see anything for the landlords. Somehow we're the villains in all of this. And I hear you on the action, but who knows what happens in June? It'll probably move on from there. So there's a big problem that's going to happen when all of this does unfold. That's why. So for the SLEG, Justin, I don't know if that's you. If you can please make a provision that condos, people who own condos, are allowed to actually participate in this program.
I hear you loud and clear, Stephen. The federal government is not making those programs. The state government is once they're allocated the funding. But I have raised this issue to State of New Jersey Department of Community Affairs and the New Jersey HMFA, the Housing Mortgage Finance Agency. I'll continue to do so because I think we need to be clear about explaining what all the federal funds are, where they're moving, and then how the state can administer some of these programs.
Thanks, Justin. Sorry, could I just, I don't want to take away from other people, but is there somebody from the state? Because the state must have made the determination to exclude condos. Is there a state representative? I know the governor's left, or not the governor, the congressman is left.
No, Stephen, there isn't. That program was developed and run by the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. And so Certainly you could contact them about the program, but there isn't anyone on the panel today.
Okay. Thank you. Because I have gone to all those people. That's how I know that they wouldn't do it. Somehow there was a determination. So hopefully it'll go in the minutes somewhere and somebody will also listen for the plight of the others, because I'm sure Nadia and myself are not alone. But thank you for your time, everyone.
And Stephen, please, like, if it does help at all, please reach out to my office. I think the Congressman's office has also mentioned casework where we can continue to raise these issues and both clarify responses, but to make it clear what's working and what's not out there.
Thank you. I will do. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to put the email that Justin has mentioned in the chat feature in just a little bit as well. Our next question is a question that someone asked to be read for them. But your question is, how often and by how much can tenants' rent be increased?
So in New Jersey, there's no statewide rent control. If a person, a tenant, resides in a municipality that has a rent control or a rent leveling ordinance, then rent increases generally would be dictated by whatever that local ordinance is. In terms of assuming there is no local rent control that's in effect, the legal standard for rent increases is one of unconscionability, literally sort of translated as shocking the conscience of the person who's hearing about it. There's also a provision that says any lease changes have to be reasonable. So there's not a sort of a bright line test that says, you know, up to a certain percentage is okay and above that is too much. It really sort of depends on the circumstances. If, for example, a tenant has been renting a one-bedroom apartment for $1,000 a month for the last 6 years and has never had a rent increase, and the landlord's made improvements to the property, then perhaps an increase of, you know, $250 or $300 a month or more is not unreasonable because there hasn't been a rent increase in so long and there have been improvements to the property. However, if that same person is renting and a landlord increases the rent by 10 or 12 or 15% every single year without making any improvements to the property, that may be too much. So I don't have sort of a straight answer for you. That's about as clear as I can get.
Thank you, Elliot. Our next questioner is Christine. Christine from Parsippany. Christine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, we can hear you as well.
Okay, so my landlord is insisting on being present upon the signing of the renewal lease she is offering me. And so I just want to ask, isn't it true that she should just drop off the lease for us to review and sign, and then we can return it back to her?
There's just zero requirement that the landlord needs to be present at the same time. Certainly might be, before COVID, it might be sort of best practice for both parties to sign the lease exactly at the same time. But in the current conditions due to COVID, there's really no reason why you should be in the same room as your landlord if you're not part of the same pod, so to speak. And so it's just not required at all.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add quickly that you do need some time to review the lease or review the lease and seek either legal advice or talk to a friend or relative. That you should also have that time, presuming it's a reasonable time. I mean, you know, you shouldn't expect to get a copy of a lease and hold on to it for 2 or 3 months. But if you need a few days or a week or perhaps even a little bit longer to review it before you sign, I think that's certainly reasonable.
Okay, because I've had a lot of issues with my landlord, and she's just difficult all around. And so when we told her you can just drop off the lease and we'll look at it and give it back to you after we sign, she said, oh, I can give you a copy. And then when I see you in person, I'll give you the real one. It's just crazy, but.
I mean, look, on some level, I understand a landlord is interested in having one document with 2 original signatures on it. I mean, that's sort of good practice in terms of having a fully executed, legally binding contract. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, she should place it in front of you, give you 5 minutes to scan it and sign it without reviewing it. If you want time to review it and then everyone can sign it at the same time, I don't think that that's unreasonable.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Christine.
Prior, did I?
Next up,
I found a bottle of water.
next up we have Patrice. Patrice, can you hear us? Patrice, do we still have you?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
I've been unemployed since April of last year, and I have been collecting unemployment. However, the landlord just increased the rent $40, so it's going to be a hardship for me. I've been using my credit cards to buy food and gas, and I'm also a caretaker of my special needs daughter. So I'm wondering if I would be eligible for rental assistance based on the fact that I'm living off of unemployment. I don't qualify for LIHEAP and my entire apartment is electric. So I'm starting to get nervous because even though I'm on the monthly plan, at the end of the year, I'm going to owe them thousands because the bills are running like $200 a month because I'm home all day, not working. So I'm wondering if I'm eligible for rental assistance because LIHEAP tells me I'm not based on what I'm getting from unemployment.
Patrice, I don't have sort of one answer for your question just because rental assistance can mean several different things. If you're speaking of either emergency assistance or temporary rental assistance through your local Board of Social Services, then no, you probably won't qualify because the unemployment income that you have will likely be too much to qualify for rental assistance through the welfare office. But if you have an opportunity to apply for either a housing choice voucher or a state rental assistance voucher or some other type of housing assistance where the rent is calculated, your portion of the rent is calculated based upon your income, you very well may qualify for one of those programs. Not that they're easy to find or to get. It's certainly not a fast, sort of a quick solution to being behind in the rent. But specifically, if you're speaking about rental assistance through welfare, unfortunately, no, I think you would not be eligible.
Okay, so what if I don't get an unemployment extension? Because like I said, I've been on it since April of last year. I did get a short stint of working. It was only 2 weeks. So I don't know if I'm going to be eligible for an extension. So then I'm not behind on rent. I've been blessed enough to keep up with it, but now that the rent's increased to $40 more a month, that takes away from everything else that I'm trying to, maintain in the process.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, certainly if you have a further loss of income, if your unemployment runs out and you're left without income, then you should immediately apply for cash assistance and emergency assistance and likely SNAP benefits, used to be called food stamps, through the Board of Social Services. Your eligibility, at least your longer term eligibility for emergency assistance and rental assistance, is tied to your eligibility for cash assistance. And so if you're a single adult, it's called general assistance. If you have children in the house, it's called TANF, temporary aid to needy families. And so, yes, if and when you find out the unemployment benefits will not continue, you should contact the local county board of social services as soon as you can.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Patrice, there's just one tiny point I want to add as well. Simply put, you can talk to the landlord and see if perhaps you can have that rent increase reduced to the extent that $40 might be unaffordable, but perhaps there's somewhere in between that the landlord might agree to a smaller increase.
Okay.
It doesn't always work. It usually works with kind landlords, but what I found sometimes is if you just talk to the landlord, sometimes they're willing to forego it or reduce the increase.
Okay, thank you.
Along those same lines, you could ask the landlord if it could be deferred until after the pandemic is over, because as you yourself heard here, a lot of landlords are not getting any rent. So, I mean.
Well, thank God I haven't missed a payment. It's just that now, my renewal's coming up and the $40 that's a lot of money.
So maybe the increase could be deferred. I mean, it's something you may want to ask the landlord to when the pandemic ends, then,
All righty, thank you all.
Thank you. All right, just a reminder, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. We can get through just a few more here, so please submit your questions you would like answered into the chat feature. All right, this next question comes from a participant who would like to have their question read. They ask, when will the protection from eviction end? I've called many places in the welfare department and they have no funds in my neighborhood.
So simply put, we don't know. We don't know when those protections are going to end. Again, in March of 2021, the governor initially had set out the extensions on a 30-day basis. And so the governor keeps extending them every additional 30 days. We just don't, in good faith, don't have any idea when it's going to end.
And at least on the federal level, it's June 30th of 2021 as of President Biden's recent executive order. But once again, that's just where it stands now, and it's been extended a couple of times. It might not be extended after this. We just don't know.
Thank you both for that answer. I have another question here that the participant asks to be read. She knows someone who lives in New Jersey and the building that they live in has been sold and a new landlord is demolishing and rebuilding, displacing her from her home. What steps should she take about relocating to a new place?
That's not a very straightforward or simple answer. It really sort of depends on the circumstances that the building is being demolished. I mean, if a new landlord purchases a building or anyone and seeks to permanently retire it from the rental market, that requires an 18-month notice to quit to the tenant prior to a landlord filing an action for eviction. If the tenant doesn't vacate, if there is some other reason, if there are structural problems, if there are, problems with the building such that it needs to be torn down, that still requires a 3-month notice, and the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs needs to sign off. The tenant may also be entitled to relocation assistance to relocate to a new property. It's a difficult question to answer sort of in the abstract. I really, aside from that, I would encourage that person or the person's friend to contact their local legal services office. I'm not sure whether that person would qualify or not, but it really sort of depends on the individual circumstances. There may be, if the building's being torn down and put back up, or there may be some funding for relocation assistance built into the project. It's hard to sort of answer more specifically.
And in addition to legal services, I would also recommend just contacting a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. there's a list that I can also ask the folks from Congressman Malinowski's office to put in the chat, but there's a number of good agencies located within the district or nearby, depending on what's closest to where the person is, but they can often help navigate some of those questions and figure out what the options might be.
Great, thank you, Justin. I will reach out to you for that link in just a second. So this will be our final question. Again, it is a question that I'm going to read out loud to you all. What efforts are being done to increase the availability of low-income housing, particularly in more rural areas?
That is a very big and very important question. You know, there are a number of tax credits right now, including the low-income housing tax credit, which the New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency uses to try to incentivize that locally. There are also fair housing advocates across the state that are pressing for more set-asides for fair housing in localities. It's very much a local decision based off of what development is going to occur in a particular place and what those resources might be locally. So, you know, in a rural area where growth might be low, you might not see as many units as you would in some of our larger cities. But there are a series of tax incentives out there. And then I think, you know, beyond that, it would be up to the congressman and his team to sort of answer what might be happening on Capitol Hill.
Just to add one thing to what Justin said, that in New Jersey, there are also properties that we refer to as Mount Laurel properties. It came out of litigation back in the 1970s, and it used to be administered by the New Jersey Council on Affordable Housing, or COA, which is not operating anymore. But what those types of properties do, or what those laws do, is they set aside a certain percentage of properties when new developments are built. So if a townhouse or condominium complex is built, a certain percentage of those units that are being built have to be set aside to be below market rate housing. The number of units that are affordable units that are required in each municipality really are guided by the population in that municipality and the projection as to whether the population will be increasing, staying steady, or decreasing. And so because there are fewer people in rural areas, because it's not as densely populated, there tend to be fewer low-income housing units in those areas, just because there are fewer folks living there. So it is difficult. I know the U.S. Department of Agriculture also has a program called the Farm Home Program, which tries to create more subsidized and low-income housing in rural areas. But it's not a quick process to sort of increase the number of those units that are available.
Thanks, Elliot, and thanks, Justin. All right, we are nearing the end of our call. Thanks to our panelists and for everyone that had questions to ask them today. I hope this was an informational call for everyone. I will turn it over to our guests if they have any closing remarks or any last minute thoughts. Now's your time to share.
Sure. I'll just say thank you to Congressman Nuri and Congressman Malinowski's office for this. It really is important for us to be getting more information out to landlords, to renters, and to everybody across the state about all the resources that are available. I've heard a lot of really important information here that I'm going to take back to the agency and raise up as necessary, and then also to discuss with the state. So thank you for your time and input, and please know that we're here to be partners and to assist wherever possible in meeting the needs of residents of New Jersey from the federal level. Thank you.
So I just wanted to let everybody know that At Legal Services of Northwest Jersey, we're able to provide advice and representation to those in need with their legal issues. Our telephone number is 973-285-6911. We're open 9 to 5. We do intakes, and we have folks who can speak your language as well. Thank you.
I'm about to put that phone number into the chat for everyone as well. Any last closing remarks, Jose or Elliot?
I will also just give the number to Central Jersey Legal Services, or at least the Middlesex County office, which is 732-249-7600. And the legal services numbers are on summonses and summonses when they're issued for eviction. So again, it is really important that if you have legal questions and you need answers, that you call us. It's free if you qualify, and so there's really very little reason not to call.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for having us, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Have a great rest of your day.